folks, so I think if everybody's happy, we'll kick off. For those who don't know me, my name is Ben Murray and I'm the Director of UK. On behalf of the Knowledge Transfer Network and Maritime UK, I'd like to welcome everyone to the launch of the KTN's Decarbonising Ports and Harbours Innovation Network. Hopefully you've noticed this is held during Maritime UK Week, and this is a week that's all about shining a spotlight on the maritime sector and bringing colleagues together to plan for the future. And there can be few more important topics to the future we're discussing today. I'll briefly run through the agenda and then I'll introduce our panelists who we're very fortunate to have with us today. Just a bit of housekeeping before we do that. If everybody can obviously stay on mute for the whole of the meeting, panelists will bring in one at a time to speak, and then I'll explain how we'll be facilitating the question and answer session in a moment. So I'll briefly touch on the scope and objectives for the network, and I'll introduce the advisory group and, as I say, our panelists. Then we'll have about 30 minutes from each panelist where they're talking about why they're involved with this network and this work, and then we'll have questions and answers from you, colleagues from across the sector who have joined us. Then I'll call on Mark from the KTN to facilitate that question and answer session and talk about how that dovetails, this network's work dovetails with other parts of the KTN's work and other things that are happening within the sector. So clearly it will have escaped nobody's notice at the moment that climate change and air quality are probably, if not one of the most pressing sustainability issues of our time. We've got the imperative as a country to get to net zero by 2050. In the maritime sector, we have our Maritime 2050 strategy and specifically our Clean Maritime Plan. That, coupled with what's happening at IMO, means that we, as an economy, as a sector, and as people, we've set ourselves a new level of ambition for the UK. And what this network is all about is recognising that ports and harbours have a critical part to play in not just maritime's transition to net zero, but transport and the broader economy too. I think that the KTN have chosen to focus their efforts in this sector is to be welcomed, and I think it's fair to say that that marries and helps paint a picture of growing interest in the maritime sector from across the economy, but also quite evidently at the moment from government. So this innovation network has been established by the KTN to gather a community of representatives from government, from the armed services, from industry, academia, and crucially from finance to co-create a sector-led compelling proposal for government and industry partnership, and hopefully to attract a stimulus package for the sector to focus on research, R&D, and to drive the change that is needed to get to net zero. And just to reiterate, this isn't broad across the whole of maritime. This is very specifically about how we decarbonise ports and harbours. So it's very focused on that, and that's an area that the KTN felt needed a specific focus and push. So that's the aim of this network in particular. So the session will then conclude after we've heard from our panelists, a chance to ask questions. It will conclude with a summary of the event, but also it will look at what the work programme for the group is, how you can be involved, and in particular, how you can help with two projects, which are referred to as the landscape map and investment planning grid. And these are two projects that what we're clearly trying to do here is not just do this on our own, but do it with the sector, facilitate and enable a network that works for all. So without further ado, I'll just move on to introduce our advisory group. If we could move on to that relevant slide, please. Next slide. So as I've mentioned, there's been an advisory group that's been established across three key groups, and the KTN uses this throughout all of its work. It describes either challenge owners, solution providers, or influencers. And you can see the logos of those that are involved in that group already. And the people we have speaking here today on our panel are representatives of different organisations from that advisory group. So if we move on to the next slide, we'll now introduce the panelists that we have with us today. So from ABP, we have Liz English, who's the Group Development Manager there. We have from the Royal Navy, Commodore Jeremy Bailey, who's the Naval Base Commander at Portsmouth. We have Paolo Favino from the Department for Transport, who is Head of Domestic Emissions within the maritime context. We have Carolina Escudero from Vattenfall, who is their Business Development Manager. From BAE Systems, we have Matt Albans, who is Head of Special Projects for Maritime. We have Richard Westgarth from Maritime Research and Innovation UK, who chairs MARI UK's working group. And of course, we have from KTN, Mark Ray, who we'll be hearing from slightly later on. What I'd like to do now is just come to each of the members on the panel and ask them one at a time why they're involved in the KTN Innovation Network and what their motivation for joining this has been. So perhaps if we start with Liz first.
Hi, thank you, Ben. Well, ABP's motivation and my personal motivation behind this is we have managed to make internally key strides in terms of decarbonisation. As an example of this, we have got 19 megawatts of solar and wind powered renewable energy across our ports. That's 21 ports that we operate across the UK. And by this time next year, that will be 29 megawatts. But even with that good progress in mind, the new policy landscape in the UK, as Ben quite rightly outlined, sets a new level of ambition. And what we're finding as operators in this kind of interim period, until the sort of next generation fuels and technologies are widely available and quite importantly for us as a commercial operator, financially viable. We're seeing a disconnect between that policy ambition and what we can make commercially viable in our ports at this present day and time. So we don't want to, be raising to DFT or other parts of government the problems. We want to be part of the solution in this. Not least to be helping our customers grow and prosper, as well as helping our own ports grow and prosper. So there is a direct commercial benefit here. We're not, here as philanthropic. There is a direct commercial benefit for us making this work and being part of that solution. And I think across the broader industry, there is that appetite to be part of the solution and act as that facilitator for the broader transport ecosystem to equally decarbonise, because ports are that linchpin in quite a wide range of modes of transport. But we recognise that we can't do this alone as ABP. Whilst we are, one of the larger port operators out there, we're still pretty small fry in terms of actually driving any real change or direction in terms of R&D effort. So we need to come together as a collaborative group and work across those sectors that hinge around ports and harbours, to create that real focus and that real impetus to drive R&D effort, R&D economics in the right way that helps the sector move forward.
Great. Brilliant. Well, thanks very much, Liz. I think we'll come back to, you alluded to a couple of points there, not least, I think we can touch on the Prime Minister's announcement last week around offshore wind, which we'll try and pull out in a moment. But I'll just introduce the rest of the panel and give everybody a chance to introduce themselves, and then we'll move into a more of a deep dive. So, Jeremy, would you like to briefly explain why you're part of the network and why it's important to the Royal Navy?
Ben, hi, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much indeed. Well, I mean, naval bases, the 3 UK naval bases offer, I think, a unique challenge when it comes to development of a net zero approach. They're mounting bases for maritime operations. They've got a complex range of activities and outputs, but they're also sat, certainly 2 of them, within communities where climate emergencies have been declared. But I think we've made a good start. So similar to Liz's story, I convened a conference earlier this year to better understand what those challenges were at the naval base level, and support the wider defence and sector conversations around ports. We've made good inroads so far. Headline reductions in energy and carbon across bases, 62% in the last decade. A range of initiatives that have been implemented: energy from waste, combined heat and power, site-wide metering, heat pumps. But the challenges that we face won't be addressed by technology alone. And we need to come together with strong leadership, direction, and good policy and practices in order that we can address the spectrum of delivery. And that's exactly what we want to get on and do. So that's why I'm here. Thanks, Ben.
Great. Thanks very much, JJ. I think that point about strategic direction and partnership is really critical to all of this. So thanks very much for joining us. Paolo from the Department for Transport, would you like to also introduce yourself and explain why it's important for the DFT to be involved with the network?
Sure. So first of all, introduction. My name is Paolo Farina, as Ben said, and I've been responsible so far for the implementation of the Clean Maritime Plan, which effectively is our strategy to reach net zero in domestic shipping. So the focus of the Clean Maritime Plan has mainly be around vessels and vessels operations. So how do we decarbonize the fleet, and at the same time we create a necessary infrastructure to make sure a zero emission fleet is actually viable. There hasn't been a big focus on ports. And by the way, today, just as a small disclaimer for you guys, I'm replacing Jonathan Simpson, who is a real expert for anything in relation to ports and harbour with 16 years of maritime experience. So for me, this is also an opportunity to learn from you what is the current discussion within the port sector around those issues. And also, just want to flag that it will be very good to make sure that we have an organization, a network, more than one within the maritime sector, where we work together to gather information and data, which is very useful in our discussions with other government departments, like, for example, Treasury. And another disclaimer, I wouldn't say anything in relation to the spending review. But anyway, thank you.
Thanks, Paolo. And I think everyone will recognize that you're stepping in here. So thanks very much for doing so. But I think you made an interesting point that much of the DFT's work to date has been on vessels. And I think that's, whether that's partly why or for whatever reason, this network's got an important role to play, particularly looking at the other side of the coin around ports and harbours. So thanks very much for joining us. Carolina.
Hi, I'm Carolina Escudero. I work for Vattenfall and especially Vattenfall Network Solutions. And Vattenfall's vision is to help our customers live fossil-free within one generation. And we know that shipping, ports, and all of that ecosystem is going to be a key influencer in how we get there. We also know from experience that electricity networks, albeit private or local grids, are also going to be a key enabler into the decarbonization solutions that we come up with. So I'm here representing solution providers, especially with an eye for electrical networks, to understand what are those commercially viable solutions that we can bring to you, and also what we can learn from the other experience that Vattenfall has as working with vessel operators. And again, the Clean Maritime paper is very vessel oriented, and I do speak a lot with vessels, and it's bringing that like vessels and the ports together to start having that conversation. So that's why I'm here.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Carolina. And moving on to Matt.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So firstly, it is an emergency. So everyone from individuals to industry has a real part in addressing it, including companies like BAE Systems. So across the globe, BAE Systems are investing in new capabilities and researching areas that provide better alternatives to technology. And specifically, as a military port manager across the globe, we really have two areas to address. Our own corporate responsibilities to reduce our impact on the climate and provide a sustainable future for everyone, but also meeting the aspirations of our Navy customers around the world in implementing their own climate saving measures and aspirations. So we hope to connect people with technology and challenge owners with solutions throughout this activity.
Wonderful, thanks, Matt. Richard.
Hi all, Richard Westgar. So I work for BMT, but I'm also chair the Maritime Research and Innovation UK, MARI UK's working group. MARI UK is an industry and academic collaboration that was set up really with a focus on technology and systems research, driven largely by industrial needs and aimed at increasing the UK's competitive position. And over the last 12 months or so, we've been working closely with the Department of Transport and running some R&D calls. Hopefully many of you will have seen them, both Clean Maritime calls and Technology Innovation calls. And through the Clean Maritime call, we've actually awarded 10 contracts to industry and small and medium enterprises primarily, and academia. Total value of those calls around about £8.8 million, with DFT contributing £1.5 million. And we're really interested now in looking at decarbonisation technologies in the round across the whole of the sector, not just on the ships, but into the ports, linking that into infrastructure, and also looking at wider benefits of how the maritime sector as a whole can take on the challenges posed by other elements of the sector. And one of the corporate spending review submissions we've made is to look at a concept of a zero carbon coastal highway, really to look at, can we use the maritime sector to remove some of the congestion and emission problems caused by road transport, particularly around freight transport throughout the UK. So we're really interested here in taking this forward, looking at it at a systems approach to the whole decarbonisation of the sector, but with focus very much on the technology and innovation side of it.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Richard. And Mark, do you want to very quickly introduce yourself as well and your role at the KTN?
Yes, sure. Thank you, Ben. So in relation to this innovation network, I'm the project lead for this. I'm part of the clean energy and infrastructure team. So ports and harbours certainly sits within my field of interest. And my background was in civil engineering and marine structures. So very much the sort of the physical side and the energy systems side within there. As I said, I'm the lead for this particular project. So we'll be the sort of the prime point of contact, if you like, for the outside world to engage with the community.
Brilliant. Well, thanks, Mark, and thanks to all of our panelists for joining us and giving up their time today, as well as obviously colleagues who are joining to watch. Just a reminder, we'll be using the side chat for questions and answers to be, or questions at least, to be submitted. So please use that side chat to submit questions, as Mark has written with his note there. And then we've got some questions that I have for the panel here. I'd like to sort of pull some issues out, and I think that might give you some thoughts as an audience about some of the questions you might want to ask later. So enjoy this section and think about any questions you might have, and then pop them in the side chat. But I wanted to start really with what we sort of think of as the challenge that we're up against, and therefore the mission that we want to shape. And I think this is probably really for Liz, JJ, and Matt, and you know, up to whoever wants to go first on it. I really, it's from your roles. I mean, ports and harbours are, I think it's fair to say, complex places with a diverse range of energies using different equipment and transport all coming together in a single space. Could you describe the makeup of energy using facilities at your ports and some examples of the challenge that you face afterward? Shall I come to Liz first?
Yeah, as you quite rightly said, it is can be a complicated picture depending on the port, and there's sort of several buckets of energy use.
I am Keen Bean, yeah, like you.
It's
sorry, Liz.
Maybe the big bucks.
Lynn, I think you've come off mute.
That's all right. There's several key buckets, if you like, of energy use. So there's energy that we use directly as a port operator, and that will be to power cargo handling equipment, port plant equipment, and port vessels. And that's predominantly diesel driven, which I'll touch more on probably later in the discussion. Then there's the power some of our port-based customers use, but they might not be directly involved in port operations. So they just happen to be co-located on a port, either because it's convenient because the goods come in there, but they could be, you know, very power-hungry operations like steel processing, fertilizer processing, things like that can be very power-hungry, needing quite large volumes of power, primarily on the electricity front, cold stores, things like that. And then we also have the energy uses of the third-party kind of port users, like i.e. the vessels coming into the port, the rail coming into the port and leaving the port, as well as the road haulage coming in and out of the port. So none of which we have direct control over, you know, what fuel they might be using, but we are there to help facilitate whatever the provision of whatever fuel they need whilst in port. And particularly with vessels, you know, they will be, when they're turning around in port, they do need to have the right fuel source lined up. It's not like they can refuel just anywhere. So as you say, that does create quite a complicated picture in terms of the different fuel sources. It's quite simple right now because it's really electricity or diesel. But as we move away from diesel and see a higher demand for electricity, that is going to create challenges in itself. And the real challenge for us is the kind of viability of alternatives to diesel in terms of the power required and the on-demand power. So I hope that helps. I'm happy to answer any more questions on that. But as you say, it's complicated, and there's stuff that we control directly, and other areas that we are really the facilitator for, and we very much want to be that facilitating role.
Great, thanks, Liz. It sounds a complex picture, but one that there's clearly lots of demand for various interests in helping respond to the challenge. So I think that's potentially quite a useful lever that you have. In terms of from a military perspective, JJ, is it a similar sort of picture that you face in your world?
Yeah, so Ben, it's certainly got similarities. I mean, we, like Liz, you know, have a vast array of users. I've got my own Royal Marine School of Music, for example, on the site. But most importantly, the naval bases are the 3 largest energy-using single sites in defence. And that really is a product of the fact that we already and have traditionally provided power to vessels when they're alongside in order to support their roles alongside. And we've got this wide range of uses that the bases deliver. I mean, if I just think about Portsmouth, you know, we're installed power capacity of over 40 megawatts. I've got an on-site 20 megawatt combined heat and power generation plant. I've got a lot of solar. I've got a large-scale battery storage system on site as well. And I support around about 220,000 tonnes of shipping operated from the naval base. But more than that, because we have 12,500 people on site every day, 6,000 car parking spaces, we really need to get our arms around, you know, the scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions to consider. You know, and we're making really good progress. So we've got nearly 50 electric vehicle charging points. We're already converting from diesel across to electric vehicles and hybrid vehicles. But because as with some of the comments Liz made there, you know, we've got a fueling depot adjacent that operates both marine gas and aviation fuel. And actually I run a regional motor transport garage as well, which is an exclusively diesel facility. So getting your arms around the total understanding of the system is where our real challenge begins to become described.
So you've got a music school and a garage as well on it sounds, you know, if nothing else, I've learned something today about what you've got in Portsmouth. It sounds really interesting and clearly just another draw on the energy, the needs that you have in that location. Matt, from a BAE perspective and the sites that you have, from what you've heard from Liz and JJ, is it a similar story?
To an extent, we're tenants on JJ's site, so he's covered most of it. But actually, we're finding it to be a systems issue, and lots of people have mentioned that is the data you're getting from energy systems and how you integrate rapidly moving technology is a really difficult challenge, especially when the need to get those quicker and quicker because the regulations come in sooner and sooner That's where we're finding the real issue as we're going forward.
Okay, now that's interesting. I think it leads us nicely to what I think is quite a sensible second question, hopefully, is we've heard of the challenge and just in terms of what the response has been. And I think it'd be quite sensible to bring in Caroline and Richard at this point, just to see from your point of view, how has industry and academia, I know Richard, you've got that sort of dual role in from Mary UK perspective, but how have industry and academia responded to the challenge that Liz, JJ and Matt set out, and what do you think has driven it, and any reflections on what you've heard from those posing the challenge? So perhaps if I come to Carolina first.
Yes, so ports are this interesting ecosystem where a lot of we have different stakeholders that have different patterns of use. But in industry in general, we've seen that there has been a lot of uptake regarding energy efficiency measures, renewable generation, etc., and combinations, or at least projects that combine private sector and public sector working together. A lot of this has been driven by positive business cases or energy savings that can quantify, and is an easier picture to sell to your board. However, when we're talking about the capital intensive measures, or those where we have a bit more of a uncertainty of what the future is going to bring, that's where there's a challenge. So many stakeholders need to be involved to agree what the appropriate next step is. That's where we see that perhaps different companies, different industries have had an approach to decarbonization, which perhaps is not a cookie cutter approach that can be then applied for any other industry. Ports being a very specific example of how we have a lot of different industries within an ecosystem that all have different patterns and need to be decarbonized almost separately, but with a systems view. And this leads me to the infrastructure question. Grid connections, energy infrastructure, electricity infrastructure, and that uncertainty on the market makes it even more difficult to make the decisions. So there is quite a challenge ahead. We have done a lot of good so far, but we're still far off from where we need to be. This is very challenging, but actually very exciting to be here. And I know Richard has a lot of also his viewpoint from Mary UK and the academia sector.
Yeah. Thanks, Caroline. I think summarize it's progress made, but lots more to do. And Richard, I think Mary UK has played a role in this. Do you, specifically around the challenge of decarbonising the sort of port and harbour environment, what's Mary UK been doing, and what do you think has been driving this focus from across industry?
Well, I think we've been focused. A lot of people focus on decarbonising ships, as was said earlier, and the IMO have obviously been heavily involved in driving down emissions from ships. But we've got as well this whole structural problem. This is a trading system. It's not just about a ship or a port. What we're much more interested in is a systems approach to decarbonisation. And to achieve that, I think we've got to be far more collaborative. Many of the technologies we're talking about are being developed in a range of sectors. The Commodore spoke about he runs a garage. Well, the automotive sector are looking at fuel cells, they're looking at electricity and things like that. We've got a lot of work going on in hydrogen and hydrogen ship power, but that then impacts on the port, saying, well, how do we manage and store and deliver hydrogen to ports so that they can fuel the ships that are using it? How do we make some of these transitional issues? So I think the challenge really is about how do we better coordinate, collaborate, particularly around the research and innovation agenda, to make the best use of the available technologies that are emerging from wherever that happens to be. And so I think quite a big part of this is there is only limited investment. Caroline talked about the difficulties of making investment business cases, but we can't all be just putting little small amounts of cash in here. If we can bring the stuff together, create a much more streamlined and collaborative research program, I think we can achieve a lot more.
Great, and all that word again that we've heard from a number of you already around collaboration, about in essence, can we see if people are working on similar projects and can collaborate, can make our push towards this end goal much more efficient? And I think certainly from my point of view, that's where this network comes in. Just clearly, you've spoken about, a number of you, around the commercial necessity to get to this, and to get to this goal in terms of decarbonisation and the regulatory push there is. But there's also, I think it's fair to say, we've been doing quite a lot as Maritime UK with young people, and there's a big focus on young people being interested in in clean, green issues and wanting to play a role in that world. And I think there's certainly a driver for change, it's fair to say, coming from society. And Paolo, I wonder whether, from a government point of view, you could tell us what pressure different parts of government and you're picking up from parliamentarians and others that obviously represent people for this push towards net zero, and how government is thinking about the maritime sector and ports and harbours in particular within that UK-wide macro decarbonisation picture.
Sure. So as you are absolutely right. So achieving net zero emissions by 2050 is one of the most important policy targets of any government, because no one can actually hide from climate change. It's an issue that has no political color. So whoever is in government has to deal with that. Within that, we've got data saying that in 2018, the transport sector was the biggest emitter of greenhouse gases across the whole of the economy, right? And more than power generation. And within the transport sector, domestic shipping is actually a problem. Domestic shipping in 2018, the sole domestic shipping, so I'm excluding international shipping, was more polluting than buses and rail combined. And the reason for that is because domestic shipping hasn't gone down as much as the road and the rail sector, because of a different level of mitigating intervention. So we've got to recognize that it is time now to start investing in decarbonizing domestic shipping. We've got to do more on that, because otherwise we just don't meet net zero. And net zero is a legislative target in the Climate Change Act, right? And no government is going to take that down, right? Now, we've got a series of specific problems in domestic shipping. One is that is the long life of assets. So if we want a zero emission fleet, and I keep talking vessels, I am very aware of that. But if we want a zero emission fleet by 2050, we've got to see that fleet deployed in 2025, right? Because otherwise we don't get there. And at the same time, if we want this fleet to be deployed, and this is the link with you guys, we need to make sure that the infrastructure is there to support its deployment. But we know that there are a series of issues in the sector, a series of market failures. For example, no one is going to invest in zero emission vessels if the recharging infrastructure is not there. And at the same time, no port is going to invest in putting together like electric charging, refueling for ammonia and hydrogen vessels if the market demand is not there yet, right? So we've got a series of questions that need to be addressed, right? So yes, the Clean Maritime Plan is, as I said at the beginning, our overarching strategy to get there. The Clean Maritime Plan provides a foundation, but we've got to have more information. And the reason why I'm actually quite excited about this, the more I listen to you guys, the more I'm excited about this network, is that this is the kind, as Ben said, this is the kind of initiatives that we need to gather the necessary information that we need for policy development. For example, which port is actually able to put together projects for rolling out electric charging? Which port has projects already in place, or is planning projects around hydrogen? I don't have this information on hand, and it would be very good to have that. Does it address your question, Ben?
Yeah, thanks, Paolo. I think we'll perhaps pull out some of we talk about, you spoke about spending review earlier, and without putting you in a place that you can't be in terms of divulging information that you might not even have. But the point you've spoken about, charging points there, I think is really important. I think we might come back to that when we look at some of the solutions that we might want to be seeing. JJ, I think the Royal Navy are in an interesting place here, because they are they sort of straddle the sort of commercial and the public world. Would you say it's fair to say, from a Royal Navy perspective, that government pressure and more broadly public interest in decarbonisation and the environment more broadly has really ramped up? And how is that manifesting itself when you're getting your I wouldn't say diktats, but your direction from government?
Ben, thanks. Yeah, I think Defence recognises the framework that government set out and the direction of travel, including the point that you've made around, the societal pressures and social responsibility that comes through. I think it recognises also it's a substantial contributor to central government emissions. In Defence, around 35% of the emissions come from the estate, which includes the naval bases themselves, but 65%, from the operational fleets, vehicles, aircraft, and ships as well. So Defence is doing a refresh of its sustainability strategy, should be published later this year in the Maritime 2050 framework, clearly sits within that. We will be, as you would imagine and hope, balancing military demand against the sort of national and international obligations so that we can continue to deliver our outputs on behalf of the nation. And whilst Defence, I think, is unlikely to lead in driving some of the key technologies, particularly in maritime, we'll be looking to understand what that technology landscape looks like and be increasingly adapting to it and retrofitting it as and where we can see that coming forwards. I think Defence estate is going to be the early space that we go to, which is why naval bases, as I mentioned earlier on, as being substantial energy users across the Defence estate, are the natural first go-to places within that piece. So in general, definitely we can recognise the direction of travel and the pressure that's coming on us, not least from central government, but I think also in the local political environments that we operate. As I mentioned earlier on, 2 of the 3 are sat close within cities where climate emergencies have been declared, and we need to move.
No, absolutely, and I think it's just a note of reflection. We often, within the commercial world, try and clearly our manufacturers and others provide products and services to the Navy, but I think it's clearly something, hearing those stats and the read across from the naval side to the commercial space, your world presents a huge amount of opportunity for those who wanted to innovate solutions and provide those and test them in various contexts. So I think it's certainly worth all of us bearing in mind, just as we're always talking about increasing those links with academia and industry, we should also continue to do that with the Royal Navy too. And I know that that's happening more and more, but I think it's something we should all really think about further still. We've heard a little bit about how the societal change and societal interests are driving change and encouraging us to drive change, either directly or through regulation that is put in place by government and other authorities. But just in terms of industry, perhaps if I come to Matt and Liz again, how is this transition to net zero being addressed by each of your firms? And just so we can sort of get a bit of a picture of what's happening across the piece, do you have any insight as to how what you're doing compares with other companies in the sector? So Matt, can I come to you first?
Yeah, well, I'm sure, like most people, we've all tried to acquire gadgetry for our own home. And what you end up with is lots of vendors with really niche technology. And it's really left up to us as the consumers to pick and choose which one's best. On an industry scale, that approach is no different. There are lots of vendors who are offering energy optimization or energy concepts and solutions. And different companies pursue those solutions depending on the circumstances. But the goals are the same, net zero carbon. So we as BAE Systems, when faced with quite a multidimensional challenge, lots of different solutions, lots of different challenges, are embarking on the approach of standardizing how we address it by using ISO 50001, the energy management systems. And for those who aren't aware of that, that is essentially a logical approach for establishing, implementing and maintaining energy management systems. And the first step of that is an energy audit to identify where our challenges are, and more importantly, the opportunities for improvement. So we've recognised it's not really about choosing niche technologies to address a problem. It's the idea that continually we will have to constantly improve the output and impact on the environment, as regulations will undoubtedly become more and more severe as we go forward.
Thanks, Matt. It does sound, we've all spoken about collaboration and partnership, but it seems from what you've said there that actually in reality a lot of the work so far has been quite fragmented and quite piecemeal. So I guess again that comes back to a role for this network, and I think we'll try and pull that out a little bit more about how we all know this is the greatest industrial transformation any of us and any generation, I think it's in living memory, if not before that, has faced. And given that scale of challenge, I think it's quite right to say that we need to be working together collaboratively and properly collaboratively in a way that we haven't done in the past. And I just wonder whether Liz, in your world, is that fragmentation and that sort of piecemeal response something that you recognise? But then also, if you wouldn't mind saying a little bit about what ABP's been doing on the ground to respond to the challenge.
Sure. Okay, I'll start with what we've been doing. So our internal, at this point in time, hopefully we can make it public soon, but clean growth strategy hinges around 3 areas. So it's generate more. So as I think I mentioned earlier, we already generate a huge amount of solar and wind power, but we definitely want to increase that capacity for both our uses and our customers' uses. As you know, the trend probably will be electrification in the longer term of vessels or plant and equipment. We need to produce the power for that. That then brings with it constraints in terms of our grid connections. You know, some ports are grid constraints, so we haven't cracked the nut yet, but we will be increasingly having to couple that renewable energy with energy storage. So we haven't ventured into the energy storage market just yet, but it's definitely an area we're looking into. The other strands of our clean growth strategy is around using less, so maximising fuel efficiency or energy efficiency. We've done a huge amount on that in terms of LED lighting, building monitoring systems, really reducing the electricity we need to use for our own operations as well as our customers. And also looking at how we can maximise fuel use efficiency through behavioural factors. That's quite a hard one to address, and there's still more to be done on that. The other area is use cleaner, so not just renewables, but looking at cleaner fuels. What are those next generation of fuels? Now, the real area of challenge we have here, and as you mentioned, a sort of fragmented approach, is that at the moment, you know, heavy industry and maritime all use diesel, and it's made life easy because it's that one fuel everyone uses, gets really good power efficiency from. What we have going forward is a very fragmented maritime as well as industry view of what that fuel of the future is going to be. So that is an area of challenge for us that we are hoping to kind of try and help resolve through here, but it's definitely a fragmented picture in terms of what that alternative to diesel is going to be. What we have, we are still at this point in time having to invest in diesel powered plant and equipment. So the retrofit technology options are going to become increasingly important, actually vitally important for the sector, and probably an area we really need to drive. We made good grounds with the KTN Innovation Exchange last year. We hosted a series of challenges to see what retrofit technology options there were out there for port plant and equipment and port vessels, and that's an area we need to continue to explore, because we've made progress, but we need to make much more progress in terms of that retrofit capability.
Great. Thanks very much, Liz. Matt, have you got some examples as well?
Yes, so we have a huge investment portfolio And that's really ranged from optimizing diesel generators for the army, where you can use the data to actually operate them more efficiently, all the way to supplying hybrid electric buses to a couple of cities in the US, and everything in between, which includes looking at ship operation, wind farms and the impact of wind farms, installing CHP plants, and even the crazy ideas such as micro-nuclear reactors, and going through that assessment study of are they feasible and are they safe, and will they provide benefit at the end of the journey. Wow.
How interesting. I get so excited when you hear about the actual applications of these and the solutions. Fascinating. Well, I think we're sort of, I'm conscious of the time. So what I'll try and do is rattle through some of these other questions that I've got as much as possible. But I think it'd be useful to continue, certainly the whole point of the network is to continue to exchange these ideas and some of these examples. And I've seen some in the chat as well. So we'll certainly make sure that the network enables that. But I just want to, just to get on to, we've heard about the problem, we've heard about the challenge, we've heard about some of the work. I just perhaps want to bring in Carolina and Richard to quickly talk about what needs to change. We've heard a few suggestions on what needs to change, but in your view, what needs to change in terms of how companies and industry as a whole approaches this challenge? And then what sort of stimulus might be needed to require that demand for the solutions that exist? And then we'll finish these questions by sort of opening up to everybody and saying a little bit specifically about what the network will be doing and how its output will be deployed. But if we could start with Carolina and Richard on what needs to change to encourage some of this good work to accelerate and to get to where we need to get to. So Carolina.
Yeah, so whenever, obviously this is a topic that is quite a challenge. We're not going to have an answer ready, implemented in the next year or so. But what we can learn is in the previous, let's say, challenges that we've had or that we still have, what has worked. And I always refer back to the EV rollout, for example. We're not there yet, but what the EV rollout has showed us is that there was a clear indication from government, so legislation and regulation was there and clear. There was a collaboration from academia and also industry, and collaboration between private and public funding and different approaches of business models. That has led from, if we think about 10 years ago, EVs were not in the agenda, and now they're clearly in the agenda and we can see them everywhere. We need to start thinking about that cross-sector response, which is why we're here, to be honest. This is why we're in this panel session and in this project, to understand the systems approach that Richard has mentioned. Mm-hmm. How can we stop thinking in silos and really start bringing that three pillars of government, private, and public together, and embracing what the future is going to bring. And in terms of a stimulus, it needs to be a clear signal of grants, legislation, and also access to just different ways of working, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thanks very much, Carolina. Richard, I guess that idea of breaking out silos and working collaboratively is music to your ears, but anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, well, firstly, it is music to my ears. And I think a lot of what we've heard today is actually about joining up, collaborating and working together. You know, I've noticed in the chats a lot of discussion around a roadmap, and I think that's a starting point. If we can all map a way to the zero carbon future, then I think we can start to focus in on the sorts of research and innovation of technologies that can deliver the benefits that we're looking for here in an appropriate timescale. But to do that, we also need to think hard about where's the cash coming from. You know, investment in research and innovation in the maritime sector is pretty hard to come by. And I know, Ben, through Maritime UK, you put in quite a big ask as part of the CSR. And I think we need to work together now to try and, shall I say, increase pressure on government that this is a sector that's hugely valuable to the UK. It stems from innovation. It's about our ability to be a leading innovator in the whole clean maritime agenda. But to do that, we need some government support to get it kicked off. And then, of course, we all need to work together to map it through and deliver those technologies into the various users and applications that people have been talking about.
Absolutely. No, we have, and I think we'll, in terms of the spelling review, we'll come to that in a moment. We are getting short on time, so what I'd like to do is just ask Liz and JJ in particular to just quickly tell us what the network will be doing over the next 18 months and how you think that will accelerate the mission we've set out today. And then Paola, I'd like to bring you into, you touched on it earlier when you were talking about how the output of this network will be useful for data and evidence and so on. So perhaps if you could just give a steer in closing for this panel as to what you ideally want to see the network coming out with. But first, Liz, in terms of what the network will be doing over the next 18 months, if very quickly you could touch on that.
Sure. Okay. So there's several stages to it. Firstly, it's starting with this launch is building that community of both operators, solution providers, and government that we need to input into this, that we need to bring together. You know, as a whole, we've seen so much in the chat just on this call, but there is a whole host of people there with knowledge on this subject that we need to really bring together and bring some focus to. We'll be establishing a number of working groups on particular focus areas that we need to. Those are around mapping, air quality, fuel and energy, and as well as, last but not least, is the regulatory and legislative landscape. Now, I won't talk too much on the outputs, but we will be drawing that together in order to, I guess, match what the industry challenges are with the available solutions, and therefore understand where is the gap in those currently readily available solutions that are available as well as viable. So where is the gap that we really need to focus effort on in the future? And we will be understanding some of that solution landscape. We will be utilising the KTN's Innovation Exchange service further to cast our net as wide as we can to really understand available solutions further.
Ben, if I could just come straight off the back of that. So I think for me, this is about benefiting from that diverse community that's out there. There's no monopoly on good ideas. We need all those ideas to come together. And finally, for me, I think we've had a couple of people touch on it. Ports are really critical in that systems approach. And we want to use this to raise the profile of where ports can play a really positive set of outcomes and catalyse those opportunities for us.
Brilliant. Thanks, JJ. Paolo, just in 30 seconds before we come to the Q&A session, which I'll hand over to Mark to compare, what would success look like for you here in terms of feeding into your work to attract that stimulus, that support from Treasury and elsewhere?
Without committing in relation to what Treasury may say or not say, but more in general in terms of policy development, if we think about decarbonizing the fleet, how this zero-emission fleet is going to look like, we need to know also how the supporting infrastructure to make this fleet viable will need to look like. And so if from this network we have a mapping, this is how the UK looks like. This is where specific capability for specific zero-emission technologies are: hydrogen, ammonia, electrification, where they are according to industry, then that would be very useful. At the moment, we do not have this information. Great,
thanks, Paolo. And I'll echo that. We're often in discussions where different parties ask us what's going on, and to have that will be incredibly useful. So thanks very much. Thanks to our panel for those responses to those questions. If I may, I'll hand over to Mark now, just to sort of run us through a short Q&A session. Mark.
Sure. Thank you, Ben. So the first question then I'll pose to Liz. This is from Phil Buckley. How do we see the port's efforts dovetailing with that, and I'm going to extend his question slightly here, with shipping and rail freight to help them in their transition towards net zero carbon? So how do ports fit in with what comes into and goes out of the ports?
Thank you, Phil, for the question. So it's we're not intending to either in this innovation network is set the strategy for rail, road, or maritime freight for that matter. But we do need to certainly have an understanding of what their broader strategy and sense of direction is, so we can respond to that. We don't want to be seen, ports don't want to be holding up, the wider transport infrastructure, decarbonisation, we absolutely would probably need economic support to make that grand change for other sectors, for rail, freight, road freight. So ports should not be setting the direction for those other sectors, but we absolutely need to be understanding what those are, being proactive to find out what they are and responding to those and working together to come up with the right solution that fits those port users. Not sure that answered the question very well. But.
Okay, that's fine. And also thank you, Paolo, for the additional comment there in the chat as well, that yes, the transport decarbonisation plan by DfT, which is, I think was going to be published in December, I think was the target date. That's coming out later this year. That will provide us with a bit more of a view over the whole system and where therefore the ports fit into that. Next question then, Richard, if you could help me answer this one, because I'll partially answer this one. Next one is from Keith Budden from Cenex. Will this network be able to help organisations and support them if they are to make applications for UK involvement in the Horizon 2020 programme and the follow-on programmes that come across Europe? I think in terms of our answer, yes, we do have a specific European programmes team which are there to help organisations navigate their way through, and of course linking to partners. But Richard, do you have anything to add specifically about the sort of the work that Mari UK is doing?
On mute as usual. This is actually an active discussion in Mari UK at the moment as to how can we work with the EU Horizon 2020 to be the Horizon Europe, to be the EU waterborne programmes as they develop, and the role that Mari can take in helping coordinate UK input to that. So we've been actively in discussion with the Innovate UK lead for Europe. Many of you probably know Louise Mothersall, who's the Innovate UK point of contact for Europe. If you don't, feel free to email me and I can link you up with her. But there's two challenges here. We're not quite sure, despite perhaps what is generally seen, as to what the relationship with the EU research programmes is going to be, and whether the position that the UK can take in those programmes in terms of participation as leaders or just as team members. So that's an area of uncertainty that hopefully is being worked on. The other part of it is one of our themes is to try and identify and bring together sources of funding to try and create larger scale funding opportunities. I mentioned the call we'd run for DfT. We had over 55 expressions of interest for what is actually a relatively small amount of money, 1.5 million of DfT funding. And so, the appetite is out there, but I think to some extent we've got to look after ourselves and start to build pressure, much like automotive and aerospace have done, to persuade government departments, various, because maritime fits across so many, to help us help the industry by securing research innovation funding in greater scale than perhaps we've had in the past. Not sure I answered the question, but that's the best I can do.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Richard. Next question I'm going to pose to Matt then, and Liz and JJ, do feel free to jump in if you wish as well. What opportunities do you see or influence do you see in terms of port operations if we were to introduce measures such as carbon pricing, or we're looking to look at perhaps undertaking carbon sequestration at ports and harbours?
I think there's no solution a bad solution at present. Most of the carbon sequestration or even carbon taxes or offsetting through greenification, they're all really good ideas to achieve a net zero carbon output. But we've got to be careful to balance that against all the other technology that might come in. And it's really the burden of investment versus the output that's the key. So people have referred to it as a system. It would be great if we sequestered carbon, but actually is that going to be more beneficial than installing battery plants. And then when you look at the supply chain of the battery plant versus sequestering carbon or whatever methodologies, you might end up with an answer you didn't expect. Again, I point out to the fact it's not really niche technologies. They are part of the solution. It's the continuous improvement of meeting ever increasing challenges. The 2050 target will be a challenge. I dare say in 2070, there'll be even more stringent one. So let's get that continuous process right and understand the mechanism to take in all these solutions, including carbon sequestering, and work out how to use them for our benefit in the longer term.
Thanks, Matt. Anything to add, Liz and JJ? If not, I've got one final question because I know we're up against time. Okay, last question then, which will be again I'll start then this time with perhaps JJ, but Liz and Matt, if you want to add anything in. So decarbonising is part of a systems change. How do we see, what role do we see that decarbonising might play in the opportunities to improve resilience of our ports and harbours? This is a question from Mark Button of Arup, who's representing the Resilience Shift group, which is looking at resilience in ports. So what opportunities do we see that decarbonising might play in terms of improving resilience?
So I think from my perspective, obviously resilience of my facility is one of the things that sits at the heart of the way that we design and operate our naval bases, both from a security, but also a provision of resilience for outputs. I think as we move forwards into the net zero carbon space, I'd be looking for diversification of either supplies, generation on site, battery storage backup, so that we can, put resilience planning at the center of our systems design as we go forwards. And then through that diversification, actually enhance our resilience to some of the future challenges that we'll face.
Thank you. Liz and Matt, is there anything else that you want to add?
Yeah, I'd twist the phrase slightly and add economic resilience. So what we're seeing through decarbonisation are technologies which allow us to better balance the cost of electricity, either because we're storing them in batteries or we're generating them far cheaper than we can do normally. So there's an element of being economically sustainable going forward because of net zero carbon technologies.
And just to add that, I think our reliance on diesel as a sector, and the maritime sector is not alone in this, but it does create a resilience challenge going forward, especially with talk of sort of increases tax on diesel. It does present a challenge as well as a potential direct cost impact to consumers. So yeah, agree, it's a resilience challenge as well as a emissions challenge.
Great, thank you. So that's it for the questions that we've got time for, because I appreciate we've now run over. Ben, do you want me to just quickly whiz through the next two slides and then hand over to you to summarise?
Yeah, thanks, Mark.
Lynn, could you advance the slides, please? And just click that one, that's it, just hold there. So this is obviously was just a few instructions in terms of the question session, but in order to carry this on, we are running an online system called Meeting Mojo, which you should have had registration details come through for those of you who have registered for this event. So you can join Meeting Mojo at any time over the next week. So it will run through until Wednesday the 21st. And Meeting Mojo will continue on after that. But over the next week, you can arrange to have one-to-one meetings or follow-ups with those of us who are registered, and anybody can register onto there. So there's a whole host of companies who are registered there as well already. My colleague, Matthew Moss, who's our maritime lead, is also registered there along with myself. So you can contact us through there, and it's a nice safe space for you to say a bit about who you are and what your organisation does, but also then to meet other people who are already registered there. So please do make use of Meeting Mojo. Then if you could advance to the next slide, I'll just cover then what we're doing with the group. Thank you. So as Liz already covered in the earlier part of this session, at the moment we're into building the community within this innovation network. So connecting with those people who have a point of view that they wish to add, who want to add to the knowledge build up and the shaping of this of the outputs of this work. So anyone can register for that. You can find that on our webpage, so on the KTN webpage, under the infrastructure group, and it's there, Decarbonising Ports and Harbours. So you can sign up there, and that will then give you access to all of the activity we're doing, but also gives you a chance to tell us a bit about yourself, so we know who you are and what you can offer. And then also we can then contact you with our regular newsletters and blog pieces as we start to build the information. As I said, we're running a series of working groups. The first two of those are underway at the moment. That's the landscape mapping work and the air quality works. The landscape mapping work is being led by my colleague Matthew, and the air quality work will be led by my colleague Simon Buckley, who's currently on paternity leave at the moment, so we'll be returning shortly, and he'll be picking that up again. That'll lead us on then to develop a series of workshops. And so we've got other working groups in fuel and, sorry Lynn, can you go back one? There's other working groups which are also looking at fuel and energy vectors, and then the regulation and legislative work. Those two working groups will open sometime in the early 2021, so in a few months' time. We're focusing at the moment on the landscape mapping work, so looking at the capabilities that are out there. So what are people doing at the moment? What facilities are there? Who's got ideas and solutions? Who are the challenge owners? And then we're also working on the policy landscape mapping as well. So what policies and strategies are driving this change? So that will result in the creation of a landscape report, which we'll be then making public. We'll also then be looking at technical solutions. We'll be road mapping those, and that's going to probably be sometime in and around sort of January, February time. And that will look on to then develop a solutions roadmap for sort of the spring time is when we're aiming to work on that. And then we'll be starting to look at the overall process that follows on and feeds into a broader investment plan. But alongside that will be, as Liz mentioned earlier, a series of innovation challenges, and that will be through our innovation exchange program. So look out for those as they come along, and we'll put those into our newsletter. Okay, so that's it from me. Hand it over to you now then, Ben.
Great, thanks Mark, and apologies everybody for doing a very poor job of keeping track of time. There's a bit of a mental arithmetic error on my part there, so apologies. But I think if I was to spin it, I'd say it's because there's so many good ideas, and this is a really important topic that we've run over. The important thing is all the content in the sidebar is captured, and all the emails from people who've registered are on file, so we can do the important next step, which is keep in contact with everybody. And so just in summary, I want to touch on a few key points and then issue that call to action. I think it's clearly you've heard that the network that's being established is to raise the profile of ports and harbours as a distinct area that need focus on our journey to net zero, because there's a lot of focus on vessels, but that's only one side of the coin. That's not to say, of course, that there's not that need for collaboration and sort of cross-silo working, and that's something we've heard about a lot today, that we need to see a cultural and sort of sector change to prioritise collaboration, and not least in creating solutions, but also in understanding what's happening already. And people need to feel confident in sharing, because by working together on this most significant of challenges, we'll have greater chance of responding positively and moving forward as we need to. And then just as a reminder, in terms of the output, we're looking here for the Innovation Network to produce a sector-led, compelling, and that's crucial, compelling proposal for government and industry partnership in this space, and also to help people like Paolo and his colleagues, as well as non-public financing channels to step up and help provide the capital required to get us there on this journey. So I'd just like to thank all the panelists for giving up their time, all the colleagues who've dialed in to join us, and that additional 10 minutes or so that I'll apologise once more for, and also to KTN for really stepping up to the plate on this and recognising this is a sector that needs significant focus. And I think you're not finding a sector that's unwilling to rise to the challenge with you, and hopefully you've seen that already. I think it's probably just worth, in closing, saying that this whole topic of decarbonisation has captured not only the imagination of industry, but also of the public quite clearly, and government too. And we all have a responsibility to get this right. And if that means we need to collaborate from the start and share and do things in a way that we're unused to ensure we're as efficient as possible in getting to this monumental goal, then we need to do so. And that's very much where the network comes in, to share, to partner, not just as a space for people to share their existing products, but to work together on new solutions and to help get to this goal together. So that's the network's role. Please do get involved. Matt's put the details in the sidebar, but we'll send them around after this too. So without any more to add, I'd thank everybody for joining us and have a wonderful afternoon.